This will be a fairly short review of the different things that led to the current construction drawings 250605. And there were a number of things I ran into putting those together. We began with this was our last permutation 501c4 at the first floor and down in the basement. And I noticed when I came out they have a plank across there. I think it's 4 by 12 holding that brick up. It's probably no wider than 8, but I didn't measure it. But they have a plank holding that brick up. And we're putting ours, this is our first floor here, overlaid. See it in red. And that means when we're finished, it looks like our stairwell, our stairway, will have a 30-inch clearance through there. Like that, because we have to put in some sort of structure to hold that new wall up, hanging over the stairwell. And I checked on this access stuff, and it looked like all you needed was it wide enough to bring your stuff in and out. Well, 24 inches, and wide enough to bring whatever you're bringing in and out. So we have 30, and 30 is after that drywall is on this new wall. But this is how we're going to hold that new wall up. These have to be treated lumber here, and they bear on that existing foundation wall. You might have to put a plate or something underneath that, because I'm only showing them as 2x6s. And really, I think those, probably I think in the end I changed those to 2x10s, just so that it matches up everything. I'm almost positive that's what I did on the plans. And if I didn't, I'll go back and change it now. And then you need the column and the footing. And that's that existing first floor. And so we're just moving that wall back a foot or so. So a lot of this work is just for that extra foot. But it's really not that much work. And that's what you end up with. And you end up with this little platform here that, you could put your brooms on that, since that stairwell is not going to be used all the time. And then you'll close it off at this end. Yeah, I did change them to 2x10s. So two 2x10s there, and then a single one there, and that one also just sits on that stone foundation wall with a plate or whatever it takes to make that level and correct, with these two coming over and holding up that wall. And this is where the new first floor wall is going to be coming out, like this. And then on the first floor, you were worried about this laundry room, and 4'2" is a lot of space, even though this is kind of a tight kitchen. I mean, it's just, everything's compact. 4'2" is pretty wide. So I ended up moving that out, and I actually moved it out a little bit further because I wanted to increase the size of that pocket door from 2'4" to 2'6". 2'6" pocket door, and I looked up this and made sure everything was correct. A 2'6" pocket door is going to kind of frame up like this, where one 2x4 that hangs your header, your track, is mounted against that plaster and into that brick, and this one is just mounted on the end of this wall here. And that gives you a clearance of 29¼ inches between those door stops that have to go on here. So you could fit 29-inch machines in there if that's what a person had. I mean, in a pinch, if they had to, they could take off those pieces. But either way, the door is still going to come out that far. So taking off the pieces on that side would give you about 29.5 anyway. So that's what I did with the laundry, and that's how the kitchen ended up. We took that space down to whatever, down to still close to 4 feet, which is still great space, even in a kitchen of that size. And so the first floor kind of shapes up like this. And there's more things we run into as we go forward through this. First thing we run into is, recall that we had earlier decided, we had earlier discovered that the best way to get that shower drain down there was by removing a section of that wall and replacing it with wood. And when we get further on, because I did the second floor first, we're going to have a bearing point for the new beam up there on the second floor, and it's going to be coming right about here. And so what I am showing is that we're going to take out the first 2 layers of brick at least. We could leave this chimney probably. You can see that there are chimney parts that will come, so I don't know how this all shapes up. In any event, we have to be able to get solid bearing from that down to that foundation wall. Okay, so even though this is how the construction drawings are currently showing it, I actually stopped the film and went back and reviewed it, and I don't know why I was so, it almost seems overly concerned about this bearing point, except the only thing I can think is that I was worried that if it's like this, we can't have it like that. I don't remember what load is coming down there, but that would certainly be an unacceptable condition. So I almost think we're going to have to try to get Geiger to approve this preliminarily and then look at this bit here, see exactly what's happening to know, because, and I'll cover this right now, when you go to the second floor, and recall we have to do all this work with these joists here. I mean, we have to put in new ones. There's just no way around that. We have to double these joists up, sister these up. And it looked to me, particularly since at the second floor, we're taking out this brick wall. When it all comes down to it, on the second floor, we're taking out this brick wall that comes through here. And so it looked to me like the best solution. Okay, this film is about to get a lot longer than it already was going to be. It was already going to be fairly long because there's a lot of detail to cover. But as you saw, I began to think things through as I was recording, and all of these slides existed, but starting at 515A, I began to make another series of slides going into a number of things. So you will just have to do what you can with this, because this was me working through some of these things, and now I've got to try to remember why. This was how I had it set up, but I'm pretty sure this end I think will be fine. This is the, and I think this will shape up here. Okay, so we're going to cover this section first, okay, and we're going to return to the bearing of these beams through here, these two 5.5-inch LVLs that it's going to take to go through here. So first of all, though, we're going to cover, recall on that first floor we have to do that doubling of those joists, and I wondered logistically what that was going to be like. In this, I would try to make this as short as I can, but I wondered how, if I was the contractor, how would I do this? And I would presume I would remove all of the flooring here in this region here, down to the floor joist, down to the top of the floor joists. And that would mean, and additionally, I would move any of this brick through here. I would remove, and additionally, I would remove any of this brick through here down to the top of this wall here. Now that gets to be a headache because some of these joists come through and they're not bearing down here, they're bearing up here. So that much might not even be possible. But if that were possible, because I don't want to waste a lot of time on this, but if that were possible, and you had your new joist, and it has to be 4 inches longer than the room on both sides to go into these pockets like the other ones are, and sister up with those, it's possible to pull it up there, but only if that brick is out of the road, and rotate it down. Now it could be, you would probably be able to lift it up and rotate it down even if this brick were all here. I didn't experiment with that, but you can pretty much see, well, maybe not. It's a headache in any event. But if you can get it rotated, and then you can get it pushed up to the bottom of the floor and pounded in, and you'll have to open up pockets on one side for this. And the red ones are the new ones, so there's 9 of them you have to do that with. And I really began to contemplate the amount of work that was going to take in the rigmarole, because they've just got so much with these lower ceiling joists coming in here and then these upper ones here. But nevertheless, we have to achieve 40 pounds per square foot for those bathrooms. So if you did have to do 9 of them, that's on both sides. You know, making the pocket on both sides and then somehow getting that thing in there. And it would shape up like that, with the floor moved out of the way like that. I don't think that's going to be that easy of a thing to do. And I looked at a couple alternatives. One of them was building a 2-inch wall, you know, just flat 2x4s against this, carrying that new load down to the floor joists below, down in the basement, which would be fine. Those are definitely heavy enough to carry that. And you could do that on both sides. You can't really do it on this side because it brings this door down to a 2'8", and it's currently a 2'10", and we can't make it smaller than what it is. And I know that will be just not allowed. And additionally, that would be kind of a headache to frame up. It would take something like this to do that. Those flat 2x4s carrying this down to the basement, and that would be on both sides. And even after that's up, even after that whole assembly is up, you would still need little blocks carrying it up to these new floor joists. But nevertheless, you can't do it on both sides because of this 2'8" bit here. And so I looked at another alternative, which was putting a beam up there, and if we had an intermediate support, it was going to take a 5-inch beam, or no, a 7¼ inch beam across there. With this bit here, this tends to look pretty clunky in live action. We get this down here, and then you have another support back on there. Now this one's okay because it doesn't close down our stairwell any more than it is. I mean, we're improving that stairwell when that drain comes out. But this begins to look really clunky to me. And then, so then I went, how much would it take to make this a clear span beam? It takes two 9.5-inch LVLs. And the bearing back here is buried in that chase. And then this would be the bearing on that end there. That's two 9.5-inch LVLs, and then you just match up these soffits. And then you would not have to have any of that rigmarole with that. You would just cut the joists to fit the length of this room, and you do that on both ends. But it's 4 16-foot 9.5-inch LVLs. But I really think that probably cuts out a lot of the rigmarole with that. Getting those joists up in that pocket, I think, is just going to be a headache, and I think, I don't even know if John Geiger will think that's approvable. I don't know if you put crown up there, I don't even think that's necessary. But I don't think this joist replacement is really going to be that viable, as you saw. I just don't think. I think somebody's going to be tearing their hair out trying to do that. So I think something like this has to be considered. But going forward, trying to get through these slides, then, this is that beam that comes through there, those LVLs. And there's another section of the slides of how I arrived that this is the best way to do this, that I couldn't do with a single span because it was too tall. And so we ended up like this and did a little shifting here and there. This bedroom went down another couple inches so that I could get this door over far enough to have a bearing point here carrying us down. But I don't think, I'm positive they're not going to allow this, where these LVLs, I mean, we can line this with treated plywood or some sort of material, which is fine, but they're not going to allow these because we would want these LVLs going in at least 2 or 3 inches, and by the time they go do that, they're going to be worried about a fire situation here. So they're not going to allow that, I don't think. So that goes away. Part of the reason this film is so long is I rethought so many of the things that I already thought through once. For example, this bit down here, I don't think that's going to be necessary. I think that goes away, and maybe that drain is brought down. For one thing, in terms of our bearing point, if we get this brick down below the floor level at some point, we can just put a couple 2x6 planks, treated 2x6 planks across here for this bearing point, regardless of whether that hollow point is there or not. I don't think anything at the here needs to be taken apart, but more on that in a bit. And so that would handle that bearing point, and as long as the joists aren't in the way, this will handle that bearing point there. And these are the joists as I kind of measured and diagrammed. So we finally got lucky on that particular thing. And I don't know, maybe this drain has moved into this old chimney thing and taken down to the basement and gotten out that way. But that was what I was thinking at that moment. And I returned to this though, and I think really the thing to probably do, instead of putting the LVL on this end of the wall, put the LVL down here to handle your, I don't show it here, but put the LVL on this wall here to handle your this end of your joists, and build a framed 2x4 wall on this one and just increase the thickness of these jambs here to 14 inches through this hallway or through this doorway, and just build a wall here, and then your drain can just come down through there, as well as any other mechanicals that might, you know, be handy for something or another. But it does lose 4 inches out of the width of that room, but I think that's probably what should be done instead of trying to fit those joists again into the pockets, etc., etc. And that's what, that's with the extra 4 inches on that. And the only thing it does, you know, these two are not symmetrical anymore. This one's 1'10" and this one's 1'6". And you can't put a wall over here because of obstructing the stairs. So the next thing in this is the bearing point of these two little 2x6s that were going to hold up the new landing that holds up the new set of 4 or 5 risers up to the second floor. And I had done it like this because I couldn't, they don't make a hanger. Simpson doesn't make a hanger, approved hanger to fasten into this brick, which is what I had hoped for and that John would approve. So what I showed on the plans, I believe this is what I showed on the plans, is that we're going to have this little bump out here. And again, that's going to be busy, and I had actually shown you cutting out that plaster and putting it back against the brick, but maybe it's just mounted to the brick. I mean, it's an old house, so you'll have that sort of thing. I don't know if it's smoothed out by angling those sides back or not. I don't like it at all, really, though. So I wonder if these are treated lumber, these two little 2x6s. I think here we might be able to get away with a 2-inch pocket in that brick wall. You know, you put them in, get everything level, and use non-shrink grout underneath it. And then you would still have 6 inches of brick between the two buildings, between those two pieces of wood on either side of this demising wall. And on the second floor then, and as I said, I apologize for this and I hope it's still understandable. So that was the situation I had down here. And when I went up to the second floor and got into this problem with this beam here, because I don't think they're going to let us go into that wall because of fire code, I started trying to do something like that, similar, and that just really doesn't have to go all the way down to the foundation. It just goes to the top of that brick wall, first floor brick wall. But I think the thing to do is just cut out 4 or 5 inches of brick in here all the way through the building and put in wood bearing for both things, and then cover that with 5/8 type X on both sides. So a layer of 3/8 and then the 5/8 type X on top of that, and all of that's concealed. And that is something that John can approve and will be that you know, is fine. So I think that's how this end of that second floor beam bearing ought to be, and that little section of wall just has to come down, you know, to the floor. And this is what I mean, how these things get dragged out. That actually doesn't have to come down to the floor. If we do this, if we cut all the way through that wall and we put in, this is how these things get dragged out, but hopefully how we end up at a decent end point. But if we cut out that wall, we don't have to take that all the way down to the floor. We just cut a pocket in that wall. We just have to create a fire separation between these two sides, just like we did on the first floor at the kitchen. And this is the minimum kind of 1-hour fire resistance assembly. So in a minimal approach, we just have that little skinny thing through there. The But really, we just cut a wider pocket through there, and as tall as is convenient. This beam is only a 5.5 inch beam. So I don't know, if you take down the first 3 or 4 courses of brick and you build a mini firewall in between these two units. Interrupting this film once again to point out that this occurs. These beams are designed as a flush beam pushed up into the ceiling. So if this is what's happening, this is happening where the top of this is up near the top of the ceiling. So we're coming down 3 or 4 courses from the top of that ceiling to put this assembly in. I mean, you can come down 8 courses, 10 courses, whatever it takes to make it workable. But that is up near the ceiling. Secondly, and not mentioned, and I don't know if I can get a big enough photo in here to show you, but that's shown as a flush beam pushed up in the ceiling, hanging them things. And this is a case of expense too. And I didn't cover it, but however, this, I'll cover it now. This doesn't have to be a flush beam pushed up in the ceiling. It's only 5.5 inches high, and these ceilings are, I think, 8'9" up here. So, and as you saw in some of the sections, there was plenty of room above this. So that could be installed as a drop beam and reduce a lot of this rigmarole up here. The only thing that might come into play is that those joists, and it should work, if the joists come in here 4 inches on each side, the double LVL should work as a drop beam, because that would only drop the ceiling in that room by 6 inches. And you can see, I mean, this cabinet's a big 48-inch cabinet. There's still a lot of space up here. So it'd be easy enough to drop this beam and lower this whole area then, and then this whole, the whole bathroom and the whole hallway and out to this, all the way out here. This whole thing is lowered that 5.5 inches. I don't know if that's more intensive or not, but definitely needed mentioned. Now returning once again, hopefully for the final time, and then these two beams can end dying against that 5/8 fire code drywall, and you can finish this out however you like. And I think that would be enough. There's only 900 pounds of weight here, so I think that's probably a viable solution for that bearing point there. And again, that's just in the middle of that wall, so it's good bearing all the way down. With regard to this half bath, I think I already covered this. I'm not sure though. I think if we use treated lumber here, and again this is a light load here as well, and we just go in 2 inches, I think that's probably going to be passable. But you could take that same approach here if you wanted to, with that building, you know, making a pocket and building a firewall between those two, and then that eliminates, you know, if they don't allow this pocket, then we do it the same way we did this, is my feeling. And so now we return to our regularly where we were before. Oh goodness, we're almost to the end of this little section, and then we'll return to the original slides before this all got started. And this is the last bit I wanted to cover, and it's up in that attic. They are going to want to make sure that that this wall here, this continues as a firewall, and they want it really all the way to the underside of the sheeting. Whether we're going to build our own 2x6 wall up there, demising wall up there with fire code on both sides, hopefully not, because it's a pretty involved process up in that attic. So hopefully that is already brick extending to the roof, and we'll have to get up there and take a look. I would assume that it is, and I could just show it on the plans as if it were and take it from there. But now I'm going to try to return to where we were before this happened, which was way back at 503, and I don't even know where this goes from here. Okay, in terms of, those are the bedroom ceiling joists. I was calculating a load for this beam up here where we take out that brick wall, and I'm not sure exactly how this roof is framed. So I allowed as if rafters were coming down all along here. And this film is so long now, I am not going to belabor too much through here because some of this is not worth it. But this is how I kind of think it might be coming together up there like that, where the load is on each of those rafters about 178 pounds, where it comes down. And this is the beam replacing those and using, and I was going for a clear span here, but they wanted 3 9 1/4 to go a clear span. So I quickly moved away from that, and to make a long story short, those ended up, and here's where you can see where I had to move that bedroom wall, use up a little bit more of bedroom 2 to get that bearing point over on top of our wall right here. Moves it over, moves that over. It does increase this to a standard closet depth, and I had been showing those as 39-inch. We've got a problem I noticed on one of these elevations here. In any event, that opening needs to, in order, because we have baseboard coming around and dying against the face of this cabinet, so we need to have space for that. So I adjusted things where that becomes a 36-inch vanity, and I went down to the 5.5 to 5.5s. It's just more adjustment as I went along. This, I noticed this wall wasn't centered on this, so something was wrong. And I went back and double checked all of my dimensions and adjusted things accordingly. Kitchen stayed the same, but instead of this double wall here, we had to go to a straight 5.5-inch wall. Went down to 2x6s, so that wall is centered here and our kitchen plan stays the same. So that's another change that I think was made after those plans were put together. I'm showing that beam as a flush beam up here with hangers on each side. And I horsed around with the skylight just to see, and there's a couple sizes you could use there, and that is the larger size, the one that actually can ventilate, and that's how I would frame that up if it's possible, depending upon how those rafters work out. It won't line up centered on that toilet all the way, but they have a slender one that's only 18 or 19 inches wide, even less than that, and that should be able to center up on the toilet. And I would make the shaft like that in that event, because that skinny one is only available in a shorter model like that. Still would give you plenty of light in there, but I didn't want to waste a lot of time on that at all. And you could show it on the plans like this. If the big one works, it's the CO8 or the A06, which is the little one, the skinnier one. This is where I discovered that vanity wasn't going to work at that width, because this baseboard was dying into the face of it. On this side, I had pulled it back and left a 1-inch filler here for the baseboard to die into it there, but I hadn't done that here, so that has to be adjusted like that. And that adjusted this floor plan like this, widened this closet up, made this a 36-inch. You could have this whole 24 inches deep if you wanted. I'm showing it 21 inches deep. And then we finally arrived back to there, and that would be the end of this film. So that's a lot of information. I recognize that, and all I can do is apologize. But I think everything that I arrived at in here is probably the economical and approach that will, get the engineer stamp and get the approval, etc. So let me know if you want to talk about any of this further. I guess the only other thing I've mentioned is this bit here. I almost think it would be worth, instead of doing this, I think it would be worth, because you have the space here, pulling this whole thing forward to 4 inches, 3.5, whatever it takes, and having this bearing come down behind that cabinet really just behind that wall, and then it goes down on top of the wall that's below it that is still there. I don't know if I can show that somehow. It would be right here, coming down on top of this, so that would be no problem at all. And then that we wouldn't have to chow that out in there. That doesn't need to be chowed out in there. So I think that would be my final comment, is that I think that commode ought to be just pulled forward. That would be my final comment on this whole thing, is to probably just pull this forward and have that bearing just come down on top of this brick wall below, and don't bother with this pocket. So that's all, and once we talk, I will adjust these plans, depending upon what you think of all of this, and there's a lot of it. So thanks very much, and I will talk to you soon.